back to our second episode of Life Talks. I am your host, Kamila Howard, owner and lead consultant of We're Divine. We're Divine is a community-based agency helping communities plant seeds to go deeper in understanding how we respond and react to racialized trauma, being able to build a healthy sense of self, especially in brown body communities. This Life Talk episode in our series is brought to you in partnership with Children of Incarcerated Caregivers, supporting children and families impacted by incarceration. I'm so excited with our panel today. We have Candice and Rochelle. Both are parents. They're going to tell us a little bit about themselves and introduce themselves. But our topic today is going to be able to expand on what we started last week. Last week, we talked about healing our own emotional wounds as adults and caregivers. What do we need to fill our cup up? How can we recognize and start to name trauma? We gave you the term racialized trauma and some of the symptoms about that. Being able to re-energize ourselves so that we can be there to provide and be that stability, emotional safety for our children. And today we're going to focus on the child. How are we engaging children? What are children noticing? How are they experiencing what's happening, not just with some of the protests, but how do we even normalize conversations about talking about race? How do we build a healthy sense of self in children and increasing their self-identity? So without further ado, I want to allow my two guests for this week, Candice and Rochelle, to introduce themselves, and then we'll just have some talks about life. So who would like to go first? Candice, do you mind?
Oh, sure. I'll go first. Thanks, Cami. Yes, my name is Candice Yates, and I am a wife, a mom of three, I say very exceptional and unique children. They're 14, 13, and 11. I do have, they also, some of my children also, well, I know. Me, please. Two of my children also have special needs, and so I'm very passionate about supporting moms, especially moms of color in that area. My background, career-wise, I work in early childhood. I'm currently the Director of Equity and Quality Supports for an early childhood resource agency here in Minnesota, and we support early childhood providers that are caring for children ages 0 to 5 and building quality programs for kids. And of course, I'm here in Minnesota, right in the heart of where everything has taken place surrounding the murder of George Floyd. And so this conversation is definitely personal and very near and dear to me.
Thank you, Candice, for being here with everything that you have going on. I really appreciate you taking the time out and being a mother of three. So really, really appreciate you putting that time into it. And without further ado, Rochelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So hello, my name is Rochelle Brown. I am currently pursuing my master's in educational leadership from Columbia University. I am a proud mother, future wife. I have a darling 4-year-old daughter. I have 2 other bonus daughters. Their ages are 2 and 7, and so they might burst into this room at any point looking for something to eat or anything of that sort. I have been an activist since as long as I've really have known. I've always been put into situations where the need to amplify your voice was necessary. I'm currently an educator inside of a charter school system inside of Houston, and will be in school leadership starting in 2021 with a school that is intentional for our Black and brown babies on the elementary level. So that's a little bit about me.
I think it is so perfect that both of you guys are not only have your own experience as mothers and living in brown bodies, but also being educators. And you, Candice, starting with early education, and then Rochelle filtering it off to the education systems. And I even think about now, we're still impacted by COVID. So that's a whole nother epidemic that we're experiencing. And so how do we integrate these conversations that we're having in the community, and how do we bring it into these larger systems? So that might be something that, you know, we can incorporate in our talk today. Again, this is a discussion. I feel like today is a sister circle. We had a father last week, so I'm really excited. I just wanted to start by asking one question. Well, starting off with our question is, I want us to consider the impact. And I don't know if you guys can see, but this little girl that's been going around. And for those that don't know, I don't know her name. You guys know it, chime in. But she has been really probably maybe under the age of 6 and shown how active she has been in the protests around the cities. And she's been taped saying Black Lives Matters, no justice, no peace. And I really think about what is the impact on her? What is she understanding? She's definitely under 10. What is her developmental capacity to hold these emotions? Does she feel like it's something that, does she understand how powerful her voice is? Does she understand her presence? What is she having to hold? So all of these different questions came to mind. And when I seen this brown child, there was a quote at the bottom of her picture, and I just want to read the quote. It says, "She shouldn't need to fight. She should just be able to be the child she is. But for this world, she can't." And I thought about it, and I wanted to ask, are our Black kids allowed to be kids? Are they allowed to be kids? Or do they have the expectation that they should hold adult type of worries? Do they have the expectation, because they're brown children and they're inheriting negativity from the outside, that they should have the emotional capacity to be able to deal with these kind of things? So I wanted just to plant that seed, and maybe let's just talk about that for a minute. Our just initial reaction, if you know, and you've seen the little girl that's been protesting, but thinking about our brown babies and the expectation that the world has on them, and the expectation that some of us as parents have on them, and how are we engaging them in this current racial climate? So what are you guys' thoughts about that? How are we engaging our brown body children and Black children in this current racial climate? Whoever would like to start.
I'll start. I think the first thing that came to my mind when you posed the question and I saw the picture was just the bias that already exists around Black and brown children, where the world already expects so much of them at such a young age. And so we know, like, our young Black boys who are 3 and 4 and 5 are seen as older. They're treated in a way that, although they might be 3 or 4 or 5 years old, they're expected to behave like an 8, 9, or 10-year-old. And so, and that definitely trickles outside of the classroom, the early childhood classroom. We carry that bias, I think, as parents sometimes. And so it's a very fine line to walk in a situation like this, where we can't necessarily shield our children from the realities of the world that they're experiencing, but at the same time, it's heavy because we can't expect them to carry that by themselves.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's a way for us to, like, scaffold conversations where we can talk to our young children about differences, about standing up for what's right, calling out what's wrong, love, empathy in a language they understand. And I mean, looking at this young girl, the first thing that I think is, like, wow, she probably has some very vocal parents who are proud to fight for racial justice, and who don't hide that from her. So they are making her feel comfortable with having a voice and being out there with them. And honestly, I have been the opposite. Not that I don't want my children to do that, but I haven't been a very frontline, publicly vocal person. And so through all of this, I've, like, been working on, like, okay, how can I encourage my children to do that? How can I be that example in a way that's comfortable for me, in a way that I feel like that I'm called to do that? And so I also know that, like, not all of our children are going to be okay with doing that. Not all of our parents would be okay with having their children out protesting, and that's fine, but there's still ways, even if they're out on the front lines or whatever line they're on, like there is a opportunity for us to have those conversations with young children, because they are witnessing, they are observing so much. They are like sponges, they're absorbing everything that we say and do, and even like our emotions and how we are just moving in this world. And your question to like, should our children have to do that? I don't think they should. But it's the reality, unfortunately, that they're living in this, and it's heartbreaking, because we know that there's, white children don't have to navigate the world the same way our Black and brown children do. And it's not our children's fault, and we need to let them know that it's not their fault. It is their reality. But how can they learn how to do that, and how can we teach white children about that reality too for Black and brown children, so that they're aware and that they make space, and that they do their part too.
Yeah. It's so much for what you just gave to unpack. And I think the one thing, we don't know the history of this child, the supportive systems that she has with her caregivers, and this is her normal, not that it's an expectation of what the world says our brown children should be more adult-like, but she was raised with this normality. She has a strong sense of self. She was able to probably move up the development a little bit faster and become more in action because of the support system that she has with her family. I think that is a big difference between the world expecting us as brown body children to be engaged, to be able to handle all what we inherited because we are brown. I also think of everybody's front line looks different, and protesting might not be your front line. Educating our children might be your front line. Your front line might be writing letters to those that are making decisions in the courts. I feel like nobody should define what it looks like, but being prepared as caregivers, we're obligated to have these conversations early, and we're obligated to get more comfortable about it and to normalize it, because once those kids leave our house, we cannot control what happens to them. And I just remember, before you jump in, Rochelle, Candice, there was one thing that you put on one of your social media, and I think it was just your kids were in the yard and they were just playing so innocently in that yard. And do you remember the quote that you put? It was kind of something about
I do. Yeah, it was my son. My youngest son is 11. He has autism, and he sees and lives in this world differently. Like his perspective and how he absorbs and processes, it's different. And so he was in the yard running around in his makeshift cape, which is like one of his blankets that he has that he loves. And I just watched him just be so like carefree and running around the yard. And I thought to myself, like, wow, like his reality, he in a way, he's kind of shielded from that reality just because of the way he comprehends and understands the world. But at the same time, that reality is in my face. And I thought to myself, like, this is how every child should be able to move and breathe and be in the world, like so carefree. I shouldn't have to have certain conversations with my children about how they are going to be treated by other people in society because of the color of their skin. I shouldn't have to like look and gauge people in my neighborhood when they look at my son playing in the yard. Kid, but I know that other people see him differently. And so it was just that moment of like, wow, he's just a kid, and every child should just get to run around like him, full of imagination, without a care in the world.
Yeah. So as we go further in this conversation, we're going to talk about that duality of like allowing our children just to be children, because they absolutely deserve that. And then the reality of that the world is going to treat them different. And so how do we continue to build their self-identity, their sense of self, and protect them, and then get them prepared for the world? So Miss Rochelle, thoughts about how do we engage children? And if we thought about the picture of this young girl and her active involvement under 10 years old, and the expectations that society put on our brown children, how do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them informed? still thinking about their sense of self, still thinking about their developmental capacity. And I love it, just allowing kids to be kids. Those are kind of my thoughts. But what are you thinking right now? Where's your feedback?
Well, I am her mom, metaphorically speaking. My daughter was at the protest and she was 3 years old. And she actually was photographed by a lot of media outlets. She was very informed of the purpose of the protest. I allowed her to see some of the footage, not all of it. Of course, I censored some with regards to George Floyd and just in the maturity value of it.
Mm-hmm.
But she understood. I'm just different. I was raised by two parents. One was from the silent generation and the other was a baby boomer.
Yeah.
And so they were the ones that did not get a chance to integrate schools.
Mm-hmm.
So their perspectives were a little bit different. So that's why I say that the activism that lies within me has always been in me because it's been inside of my household. So I think it's important. My parents felt like it was important to culturally raise me properly, to make sure that I understood what was going on in the world and how I was affected by that world that I lived in. So my daughter was at the protest. She was 3 years old at that time, and she was yelling, "Hands up, don't shoot." She understood what it meant. She understands what good cops are and bad cops are as well. She understands what the purpose of cops are. We read a lot of social activism books. We read a lot of things about the march. So she's familiar with it. And just this morning, she was saying something to me about George Floyd. Yeah. So she's very much involved. I believe that we have to do that for our kids. We have to amplify their voices. I'm a strong proponent on them knowing their placement and allowing them to speak freely. In a perfect world, our kids wouldn't be as mature as they are, but unfortunately, we live in the realism that we have to educate our kids and we have to allow them to know what's going on. And they have to know it. It's uncomfortable that, Elizabeth gets to walk freely and no one's going to look at her if she's jumping off the sidewalk and going into a seesaw when the park is closed. But my daughter comes along and does the same thing, and they want to say that she was loitering and she was doing something that was wrong. So that's the reality of what we live in. Until we change these mindsets within generations that have existed, we're going to have to be uncomfortable with these conversations with our kids to allow them to be able to have voices and understand the situations that they might be put in and how they can empower that situation to be better.
What feedback will you give parents that, and I want to hear both of you guys, is the feedback, you said what?
Let them speak. Let them speak.
And what does that look like? How do you prepare them? So, there are some parents that just don't know what to do and they have very vocal kids. What suggestions will you give parents out here to prepare them if they do want to engage the children actively on the front lines?
Well, our generations, the new generation, Generation Z, is very visual. They're a visual generation. They have access to a lot of things that we didn't even have access to. I was telling my daughter about Oregon Trail. She was like, "What is Oregon Trail?" I was like, "What? You don't know about Oregon Trail?" But these kids are visual. My daughter was using a phone at 1 year old. So how do we do this? How do we teach our kids? We have to let them see it. And so once you let them see it, you let them see it in the rawest form. When I mean raw, I mean allow them to see it without interjecting anything of your own beliefs or your own faiths or your own opinion. Allow them to see, and of course censor some things, because some things I think is a little bit more mature and they are not able to fully grasp it. But Jewel was able to see some, right? And when she saw some, she recognized that's good and that's bad. That's bad. What happened was bad. That was wrong, mommy. I allowed her voice to be heard. In my classroom, it's the same way. When it's things that are uncomfortable to students, or if it's things that are happening, I allow them to speak. Tell me what you're feeling without me interjecting and saying, well, you are right, that is wrong because of X, Y, and Z. No, I want to know what you're saying. So in the generation, when you're dealing with children, we have to be very intentional through our visuals, allow them to see and allow them to amplify their voices afterwards. Now, you then do, after they say what they need to say, it is important to give guidance because they need to really understand it to a certain degree, but I'm a proponent on let them see, because if I don't show them, you guys remember that what our parents used to say, if you don't see it, if I don't tell you about it at home, they're
gonna see it on the streets.
So I'd rather you see it at home to understand, so it doesn't blindside you when you get outside in the society and are forced to deal with certain situations, and you're like, my mom never told me this, my father never told me this, where did this come from? No, you saw it at home. So I educate at home, and I believe that as well. The classroom is an extension of your house. Your kids your students are with you for 8 hours a day. When they go home, they're going home to shower, bathe, clean, do homework, and get ready for bed, and wake up the next morning, and they're here to be greeted, and I greet you. So my classroom is the extension of my home. So I do the same thing with my kids. They understand about social justice, activism, they see it. I give them opportunities to use their voices. We do affirmations, we do mindfulness, we recenter their thought process from negative to positive, all of these things to deal with trauma. And so that's how you work with children.
And I think it's so interesting just to have the two of you, the comparison of how you both engaged your children. And when I'm hearing you speak, Rochelle, is that not only did you provide the tools, the resources around, you provided the emotional safety. So Jewel, your child was raised with this. It became familiar. It's not uncomfortable because it was something that was not unfamiliar to her. You was able to gauge into her developmental capacity of what she can help, what she can name and what she can't. But you also gave her words for her feelings and being able to name those things. And when I think about naming that, I just thought that even calling what's happening is so important. I've heard some people call it a riot. I've heard some people call it a protest, a demonstration. And our children are looking to us for that definition. So words have so many powerful meanings. And so how we engage children and what we label, what's coming on, that's going to give it a positive or a negative association. So I was even thinking about that when people are saying, is it a riot? And I was like, I would definitely never call it a riot in front of a child if I want them to understand how powerful the unity of our community is in our voices that need to be heard. So thinking about what riot means versus what does demonstration mean, or what does protest mean? And even talking about it from that language, the differences that make a difference between those words. They have two very different meanings. And as brown body caregivers, it's our choice how we're going to engage children. And your choice was to have your children and the kids that are in your care very active. And then Candice, it was kind of the opposite for you. So when you hear Rochelle and how she supported her child and being very active, just what thoughts go into your head of kind of what your kids needed? And if, there are some different developmental capacities for your children, but outside of that, just that engagement of differences, of not being so active, and just kind of think about your choice of what was best for your children.
Well, I think we have some similarities there too, because although publicly we weren't as involved in, different activities, I really was faced with, I really wanted to sit down, especially with my girls who are older, and just really ask them, like, how do you feel about everything? And not number one, like you're saying with this generation, not assume that they didn't see anything, that they aren't aware of what's going on, because my daughter's on Instagram, they are on TikTok. And so, I think what I ended up being able to do was utilize like some of those those social media tools that they're already engaged in and say, hey, what are you seeing on there? Especially like on TikTok, I'm like, okay, what are you seeing on TikTok? Like, what are some of the things that are popping up? Because there were some things that were coming up, and I was like, oh, well, tell me more about that. Like, what were they saying? And so, her and my other daughter were just explaining. I'm like, oh, okay, well, how do you feel about that? And not like you were saying, Rochelle, not just jump in and be like, well, that's wrong, because they'd be like, well, why is that wrong? And even before all of this, like one of my main goals as a parent is I want to raise my kids so they can learn how to make decisions and learn how to think. There's so many influences out there that, I don't want to be the helicopter parent that's always, well, nope, you're right, that's wrong because of X, Y, and Z, because they may have a different perspective. They may agree that it's wrong, but I want them to be able to really critically think about why is it wrong. And even, we live in a lily white suburb here in the Twin Cities, and we do. but
the term really white, we might have to define that in a
well, we are the only family. We're the only family of color on the block. There are other families of color in my little town here. I'm not far out of the Twin Cities, just like one or two suburbs out. But so the people, they see other people of color. But when George Floyd was murdered, the air was different. And of course, people just move differently. And so I really was like, okay, this is an opportunity definitely for our children to hear how we're talking about this in relationship to our neighborhood and what we're experiencing with neighbors. And we ended up having, some conversations with some of our neighbors that our children witnessed. I also overheard some very nasty things from some of our neighbors. And so for me, it's kind of like immersing my children in that reality of like, this is what we're living through. Like, pay attention to how your dad and I are responding. But also know, like Rochelle was saying, know that you don't have to like put up with it. This is how we deal with it. But then also talking, then that really opened up opportunities for me to talk to them about, school and, okay, what kind of conversations are you and your friends having? When you're texting each other, are they talking about it? Do they have questions? And just really kind of just sit back and be like, okay, tell me more. Like, what are you guys talking about? And I've really observed my daughter, build a voice. She's very, she's an extroverted introvert?
Introvert.
Yeah. So, so I wasn't sure. And I, like you said, I kind of questioned myself, like, okay, have I done enough? But when we experienced some things here in our neighborhood, like, I really realized that my arena is different and my children's arena is different. And so as long as I'm in the arena and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I'm making space for them to say like, well, I don't really know how I feel, like I'm kind of confused, I don't understand. Okay. And not make her feel like she should understand because that you're this age and girl, you better know. Like, no, like, let's talk about it. Ask me some questions, but then also give her space so that she can, navigate her own development and understanding too, and talk to her friends and not feel like I'm like wanting to know everything. But I've seen her kind of starting to develop a voice. I see her posting things on Instagram, and so then I'll say, oh, that's cool, like where'd you see that? And it surprised me because I'm like, okay, like I see her kind of stepping out and being more vocal and sharing her thoughts and her perspective, and I know that it's her choice to do so. And I know that she's gaining her own voice. And so I appreciate that, Rochelle, though, that, give them the space. Let them say how they feel. I'm 40 years old. I come from the generation when you're around elders, right? You don't say anything. You keep quiet. If somebody do something and you're young, I don't care. You need to be respectful. You can tell your elders, but you need to be respectful in that situation. How dare you talk back? to somebody, even if they're being disrespectful to you. That's the generation I come from. And so
I
now
think that's
it's
the difference though with our generation. I mean, we talked about being 40 this year, and in that kind of 35, I would even say 30 to kind of 45 range. We're such different caregivers and parents than our parents, and we allow a lot of freedom, more freedom than we were given with a voice. I love that both of you guys are talking about basically preparing both of your children for the world, but with support. You're not telling them to go out there and figure it out. You're allowing them some space, some independence to practice, to kind of learn what they're on. And then you're checking back in. What do you know? What have you heard? What are you thinking? What are you feeling about that? And it's just a lovely balance of providing independence, preparing them for their brown bodies, but that your caregiver is always here to support you. And that is what our children need. Unfortunately, all of our children don't have that. And it's because some parents just don't have the capacity to even form words themselves without even thinking about other adversities. I've talked to some parents that are like, I'm just so traumatized right now. I don't have the words to give my child. I don't have the words for myself. And that's why last week's episode was so important, because we have to find the words for our kids. Like Rochelle said, if we don't give it to them, they are going to get it from somewhere else. And like you said, Candice, they're on social media, they're on TikTok. We can't helicopter them. We can't monitor them, what they're doing all the time. So it is very important to have both that balance, and everybody's vocal looks different. Even if your child, Candice, decided not to vocalize publicly, your voice mattered in this house. Mm-hmm. Your voice mattered in this neighborhood. Your voice has an impact. It's valuable. And so they're getting those seeds. For kids that don't get that, we need to have it in school. We need to have mentors. We need to have kind of that it is a village, not kind of, it needs to be a village again, to have parents like you to be able to provide the same things that you're doing with your children to kids in the neighborhood. We definitely need that village concept back. I want us to take a little minute and this is like a short video, it's 1 minute. And I don't know if anybody has seen it, but it is a mom that decided she didn't do it intentionally, but they were taking a ride in the neighborhood and they ended up running into a protest. And she's talked to her kids about peaceful protesting and finding your voice. And they've been raised as race conscious kids, but she didn't realize the emotional reaction in the moment that they were gonna have. So let's just watch this and then we'll come back and I want you guys to just tell me your thoughts.
You don't want what to happen to you, baby. I don't want no one to put their new on It doesn't matter about the races. What matters is that you're all people. It doesn't matter if you're different or not. What matters is that you're people. These white folks are killing black folks for no freaking reason. Baby, I promise we're gonna do everything we can to make sure that don't happen to you, okay?
For me, the first time that I saw that, and even just now, my heart it cringed, because when those babies cried, I felt their emotions. I literally inherited their emotions. And for some people that might be outside of our cultural group, they might ask, well, how would you put those children through that? As if it's something that, we're controlling or not controlling. But the importance is the parent was there to support them and to talk them through their emotional experience. And like you were saying, Rochelle, if I'm not here to do it, the world is going to put them through that. So how do we balance that? How do we balance the difference of protecting our children, but preparing them for a world of their reality and what their reality brings them? So I just wanted to ask that question, and then what are you guys' thoughts just about the interaction and seeing those babies just so emotionally connected? And that hurt. I inherited that hurt. So what was your response?
Well, I applaud the mother as she was stating that her children were very articulate, but she's very articulate.
Yeah.
Our kids are a reflection of us. And I think in that moment, I was able to see that the reason why her kids are the way that they are. She was intentional. I love using that word. That's my word for 2020 is intentional and purpose, right? So she was purposeful. One of the things that we have learned in a leadership class that I love and that's dear to my heart is about the idea of hegemonies. So hegemonies, when you think about people of color, are built on experiences. So people of color learn through experiences, through stories, through narrations, through passing down things from one generation to another generation, or how you feel or how you see things, right? And so that's why there's so much trauma that lives inside of us, because we're those types of people. Whereas Western hegemonies or hegemonies from non-people of color are very factual, scientific, well, science says, right? And we're like, well, hey, my grandma said, this can't happen, right? So there's totally different. And in that moment, that mom allowed her kids to experience something. She was quiet, like I said, what I've done with Jewel and my other kids, and just let them see. And then allow them in their rawest form to just be able to say what comes to their mind. So for the son, he's a Black son, right? For him to literally saying there are white people killing Black people, right? And he's probably looked at in society already, have no idea how old he is, but he is already looked at as being 5 to 10 years older than what he really is. He is expected to be mature, and these are things that he is finding out without his mom telling him. These are things that are inside of his schools that he's seeing, inside of his neighborhoods. He lives in Warner Robins, Georgia. So I lived in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm familiar with Warner Robins, Georgia. So he is being looked at as a teenager in a little body. So I thought that in that moment,
they're not familiar. What kind of demographics are in that area?
Okay, so what I like to remind people about is when people think of Georgia, they think of Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I like to let them know that that is a very small microcosm of what Georgia is. If you step 10 miles outside of Atlanta, things look vastly different. And you're ready to get back to Atlanta, unless you were raised in that situation. So if you were raised in that environment, it's like, oh, it's cool. I've been here before. I live here. I know the people. I know how. So basically, you're systematically programmed to be a certain way based on your environment, right? So you don't go outside of doing this. And this is the norm, which might not be the norm if you go somewhere else, but it's a norm that's been programmed into you to do. So Atlanta is Black and very diverse, but the area surrounding the airport, when you get out, you go the wrong way, it might be something a little different. So they were in Warner Robins. So undoubtedly, she's had to have tough conversations with her kids. And she's very articulate to me to let me know that she speaks to them. So she wanted them to experience something that she's told them about. So it wasn't that they just went to a protest and she just drove through. The way that her son said about crying and saying white people killing black people leads me to know that she's had conversations with them beforehand, and now was like, let me show you what the protest looks like, right? And it evoked a certain type of emotion. So I think she was awesome. I think you have to do that with kids. These are, like, again, it's visual learners. And then, you know, if you're uncomfortable as a parent on how to say these things, I need you to put your children in situations, whether it's community organizations or school, where somebody else can pick up the village's responsibility. Because that's the whole village that need to be on one page, not just me at home. But when you go outside in the world, the other people that are the other caregivers that are meant to protect you and support you, have to philosophically have some of these same morals to implant into your kids so that they get it from all sides. And if that is not happening, then you're doing your child a disservice. So I'm not beating up any parents that's not doing it. I understand it's very uncomfortable, but you need to make sure that your kids are going somewhere where it's getting done and getting told. So I would say that's my piece to that. And I love that mother did that. That was awesome and amazing.
I thought it was brave, it was awesome, it was all the things that you said in it, and it just made me think that also as brown bodies, we are experience-based people. And so it's things that they've learned at home, things that maybe the older male child seen on their own. Like you guys said, they're all out in social media, and he had words and an experience now for his emotions and feelings, and that was his word. And that was how he was connecting the experiences. And she allowed a safe space with her for those children to express themselves. Our children have to express their emotions. For a lot of our kids, we're thinking even about social and emotional regulation. Those meditations don't necessarily work. They have to physically express their emotions and get that out. We are emotionally expressive beings as a culture, many of us, and I'm doing some generalization. But for many brown body individuals, we have to express ourselves. That's how we maintain control. And the first thing I thought was, wow, how beautiful it was that she was able to allow her kids to get the experience they need with this parental support. So she's there. She's already provided them previously, you can tell, with some backgrounds and some supports and some words. And now this child is taking that experience and connecting it and expressing their emotions, how they feel. And they have that support and they know that. And so you're preparing them to go out into this world to be anchored in self because they got it at home. This is the reality of how our children have to be prepared a lot differently. And for those that are not part of the cultural group, it is easy to make judgment. Why would you take your kids down there? Why would you express them to that? Because they're going to run into that eventually. So I cannot put them in this little incubator because I want to prepare them now early while I'm here to walk them through what they're going to need to not only survive in life, but thrive. And I think that mother did a lovely job of that.
Can I interject something else? So you got to research. I tell people this, research this Generation Z.
Mm-hmm.
They're a different bunch of kids.
They are.
They remind you a little bit of those baby boomers.
Yeah.
They were like, I'm a protest, I'm gonna do this, I'm here, I'm present, you're not moving me from a table, I'm gonna get on a whole school bus and ride across the country and protest. Now, they have embodied the DNA of their great grandparents and because that's what it boils down to. They are different type of kids. So if you try to reel them in, you can't reel them in. I have like these what our generation benefited from was we benefited from the work that the other generation did. Generation X and the millennials have been a direct benefit of what baby boomers and silent generation and everyone else did, right? So we've sat there and allowed our little scholarships to get us into these good schools and said, oh, my kids are going to these magnet schools, it's great, and all of that. And we have literally shut our mouths to so many things and allowed systematically things to happen that turned into generational. So here comes our kids. No, we're not doing that. I'm not for it. It's not happening, not on my watch. And we're like, whoa, where did they come from, right? Because we benefited from all of the systems that were put in place by our parents and our grandparents. So we didn't really have to do a fight because we felt like, well, what are we fighting for? Because they fought for us to go to this school. They fought for us to go to college. They fought for us to live in this community. They fought for us to do this. So I don't see what I'm supposed to be fighting for anymore, right? So we sat comfortably in our homes and just wanted to raise our kids when it was totally different. And so I love Generation Z.
There we go, right there. I hear them. And to piggyback, will allow you to chime in, Candice, but I believe this generation is different. They're intuitive. They're finding their own voice. A lot of them that are more extrovert are strong-willed. I think I have 12 godchildren, so I don't have any biological children. I don't need any at this moment with 12 godchildren. But I one in particular, she is a middle child, but she is a middle child that you know her presence as soon as she walks in the room. She kind of demands that presence. She's really in tune to people's emotions and experiences. She's checking back in. If you look sad, she's gonna ask. She's going to ask about your feelings. She's going to confirm, are you sad because of me? Something I did, something that happened. They're really involved. And so we have to blossom that kind of innate identity that they have. And it is different. I was allowed a lot of freedom. I call myself a Y kid. So when I had a question, I was allowed. My grandma was born in 1921, and she allowed me just to blossom my curiosity. I literally would go around the house taking apart radios because I wanted to figure out what happened, what's in the inside, and then I could put it back together. But I was allowed that, and that gave me the ability to be able to question things that did not feel right with me. Just because you're in this position of power or you hold this position of status doesn't mean that works for me, or doesn't mean that that's right for people that look like me. And so that was me, and I was born into. I had that innate kind of capacity to question, and my family supported that. It's the same thing with this new generation, that they are very vocal, they are very intuitive, they want to be involved, and it's our role to shape those experiences. Candice, what was just your reflection or just anything that we've said? And then we'll kind of go into some of this, what's on the slide.
Yeah. I mean, to the video, I think one of the first things that I thought of was like, this is truth. And like you were saying, a lot of times we do our children a disservice if we try to shield them from the truth. And I don't even know how long ago. Recently, I was kind of in the midst of, a faith-based person, kind of making some comments around like we shouldn't have those conversations with our kids. And it was one of the things they mentioned was like, moms, don't say, you shouldn't have to have that conversation with your Black sons, and like Black men, don't say I could be next. But in that video, it was like, but this is our truth. And we're not saying like, yes, this is going to happen to me, but that mom had to allow herself to be vulnerable, to allow her children to then express how they were really feeling, and for her to sit there and not necessarily have all the answers, but to be able to look at her children and say, we're not going to let that happen, instead of like, we shouldn't have this conversation because you shouldn't be concerned about that because you're a child. It's like, no, that was truth coming out of that young man. That was truth coming out of that little girl. And a lot of times we dismiss that in our children, especially when it comes to their emotions. And I've definitely been guilty of that with my own children. They truthfully express their emotions about a situation, about how they're feeling, and we think because they're a child, they don't really understand. And it's like, no, they really do. Like their emotions in that situation probably were just pure raw emotion, like pure like empathy, connection to the moment, like all of that is all kind of clouded for us as adults, given our life experiences. But for children, their emotions were so raw and it was true. And we owe it to them to allow them that space and not to say, oh no, honey, don't say that. Don't say that. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean for a child when they're having that emotional experience? What does it mean for us to say, oh, no, you're okay. Don't say that. They need more than that. They need more. And like that mom in that moment, she didn't try to, explain it away. She didn't try to like, give them this long lecture. She just said, I understand. And we're not going to let that happen to you. And so that told them that, like you said, my emotions are valid. How I'm feeling is valid. And what I'm witnessing is real. And this is my truth. And I think like you said, Cammie, and I love, Rochelle, how you kind of explained just the difference of the generations, because we did. Like we were like, hey, I'm cool. I'm living my best life, right? And then we got hit with all this, and I'm so inspired. I'm so proud. I'm like, thank God for Generation Z that is like, oh no, I'm not letting anything slip through the cracks. I'm like, thank Thank you. And then that's, you know, motivating and inspiring to me, like, okay, recapture and regain your voice because it's there, you know, don't rest. And I think your point about the village and the community is so vital. And that's even something that like we're experiencing personally in my house, like just, you know, do we have our kids in that village, and how important. And for me, it's for, you know, from a faith-based perspective of like, are we in the right place? And it is vital for our children, you know, not only in my household to have like the foundation within their faith, but also, like you say, within that village. And I think those two for us are very closely related. And we've been witnessing like, if that's not existing, like where we are, it is dangerous. It's very dangerous. And I don't want my children to be around that. I don't want them to be around those false narratives that try to tell them, well, if you just, there is no if you just. There's thousands of experience that tell us otherwise. So we can't just say to them, well, if you just, and you know, that's a whole different conversation. But I think I appreciate you saying that, because we do have to evaluate sometimes, like, if we need to create and gather and seek out that community for our children and for ourselves, so that we aren't going it alone, and so that we have other people that are also speaking the right thing to our kids too, and validating those things too.
And that's why, you know, doing this live talks was so important to me, because there are parents that are isolated. There are parents that don't have anybody to even connect to. They wouldn't even know where to start. They don't have a faith base. They don't have a village. They're literally isolated. Well, maybe in the world of COVID right now, you can tune into these videos and connect with one of us, your sister circles. We're going to have different people every week show up, and you can get that virtual village, that virtual connection. Whatever you need that support. We need that village. And I love two things that you said, Candice, recapture and regaining our voices. I feel like when we talked about generations, there was a level of comfort. I'm born and raised in Minnesota. My family's from the South, but I was comfortable in Minnesota. It was in the city. Diversity was beautiful, right? I didn't have any negative racial experiences the first, I would say at least till about high school. And then I got to high school, and as I grew into my career, I started to notice I'm different. And I mean really different, that I'm intelligent, I'm articulate, I'm all these wonderful, Black, beautiful things. And then what is happening is now I'm a threat. I said this last week, but I'm gonna say it again. One of my girlfriends gave me a term, going from pet to threat. Going from pet to a threat as a Black woman. And so I started off this journey as being very shielded, being able to be included into a lot of things. And as I grew my career, all of a sudden I'm a threat, because of my identity and my strength. And so our generation is starting off right away as a threat. We don't know why. It's something that we just inherited. So we have to prepare our kids. It is life or death. And so if that mom didn't provide that moment, those children would not be prepared for when something does occur, what to do, how do we problem solve in the moment? There are often times that we got to make a split-second decision, life or death, life or death. And so we don't have the luxury of, one of the panelists last week said, of learning about racism. We have to experience it. We are experiencing it. We're holding it in our bodies. And as each generation evolves, there's different responses. I remember the baby boomers, my aunt's generation, she's the wait and see. One of our family members wanted to go to the protest, and the first thing my aunt said was like, well, let's wait and see what happens. Well, we've been waiting and seeing forever, but that's my different generational lens. And then the next generation underneath us is like, we're not waiting for anything. We're actually going to control this situation. So I feel like we've even talked about just the different generational ways of that we're providing caregivers, the different generational ways that our children are showing up. But there's still a common theme of preparing our brown and Black body children, our Black African-American children for the world. So I want to transition us to these three questions that I have on the screen, and we'll kind of just go through it. But the first one is, we talked a lot about how preparing about hard conversations. And I use hard conversations because if the child does not have the developmental capacity, or you don't have the capacity and you have not dealt with your own emotional wounds, the conversation can be hard. But it's our norm talking about race and racism. So when I think about being in integrated audiences, I see more discomfort with those that don't look like me because it's new to them. And we live in these brown bodies all of our lives. So it just made me think, well, how do we have these hard conversations? And in particularly, I'm gonna move us into now about police brutality, because that young man was really specifically talking about interacting with police officers and wanting to live and coming home. So there's that reality, and that's a reality. And we know it's not an all or nothing. There's not all police officers are not bad, but there's a reality that Black men in particular are not waking up and coming home when they have an interaction with a police officer. That is a real reality, a fact, and an increased statistic. And at the same time, how do we build their sense of self, right? How do we still protect them as a child? How do we understand that threat is real? There are some police officers that have not been trained in cultural diversity. There are some police officers that do hold biases. They have the power to end our lives. So that threat and that fear is real. And then how do we balance that off with, well, they're supposed to be safe, right? They're supposed to serve and protect. So there's reality, and then there's the expectation. And so how do we prepare our kids for both? Because our kids have to walk both all of the time when they're navigating. When you're in certain situations, you make sure if you get pulled over, you can't get pulled over like your white friend. You have to make sure your hands are up, don't look in your pocket, keep your dialect a little bit more monotone, your decibels, all these things I have to check. You have to wear that duality at all times to survive, just survive. And then thinking about the duality of navigating through the world. There's a way that I talk with my village than different than when I'm in various environments that are more integrated, because it's a different type of message that needs to be received. So bringing it back to my question, how do we prepare children for this dual role that they have to have? The role of fear and threat, especially in the Black community, and interacting with police officers, and the role of they're supposed to be safe. They're expected to be this. Just all of these dual roles that our kids have to play. How do we prepare them for that?
That's tough. Because generationally, we have been taught inside of our households to fear police. So this is not something that occurred with George Floyd. This is not something that occurred with Michael Brown or Tamar Rice or anything of that sort. This is something that's taught inside of our households for as long as anyone can remember. Like honestly, I feel like you have to have the conversation, but I also feel like as village and as adults, we have to do better in erasing the stigma and wanting our kids to want to be police. Because how do you change a system? You got to get inside the system. Yeah. You can't change it from the outside. You can try your hardest and say, wrong, don't do this. But honestly, everyone's just looking at it as an opinion. If you want to change the system, you have to get inside of the system. And so there has to be a place where we start to create inside of our schools, inside of our communities. We have to get to know our police officers. Wow. And then once we get to know our police officers, then we understand their systems. Everyone has a checks and balance system. You do not work in America and don't have a check and balance system. So complaints work. Being able to be vocal, like this person does not belong in our community. We do not feel good about this. Everyone getting together collectively to get that police reassigned to another place where he would feel comfortable. So I think in order to change the stigma about police officers, or in order to create this duality and make it make sense, I think that we have to get to know who the police officers are first. We got to bring them inside of our schools. We got to bring them inside of our communities. We have to measure and weigh their intentionality so that we don't have to wait till. And I think once that happens, it starts to normalize it a little bit. And then progressively, you can change some things. You can start to have kids now say, I want to be police officers when I grow up. Guess what? Now you are implanting a seed into these students to now want to go into a field that they were taught was very harmful. And once they get inside that field, they change the narrative, because now you have people that look like you inside that are policing effectively and are not harming you, but rather are wanting to build a safer community. So I honestly don't have an answer to a question of how do you maintain the duality, because the duality existed long before I was ever born, because the history of police goes back to slave catchers, but that's another story for another time.
Yeah, we can do that another show on that, the history of policing. But I think you did answer it though, Rochelle. It had, again, our baseline is it starts at home, and I love that you said erasing the stigma of just the negativity of what police represent, and that the police is just one thing, one entity. I had to learn that on my own, going back and forth as an adult from Minnesota to down south. I did not have a good experience. Or a good, I would say experience, a good experience of police officers. They were, in my mind, a threat. I never had any personal negative experience, but because of what I noticed and experienced of people that looked like me. When I started to come to Houston, Texas, and I actually seen Black police officers, which is rare to see in Minnesota, okay? Black police officers, people that look like me, I got to know them first for who they were and the uniform second. And I know if you're outside of the community, that might be hard for you to understand, but I had to see them as a person first, uniform second. Once I did that, I connected that uniform, that it can be a sense of safety, because there's somebody that looks like me that is inside now, that understands my experience, right? That understands what I go through, but also I can resonate with that person. So I started to utilize that. I said, well, if I had to be taught that, let me teach children that. So I literally would bring police officers to early learning centers, and I would have them come in clothes plain people. And they would be familiar. It wouldn't be like the first time they would see the individual. It would be like, Mr. Keith, Mr. Keith. But Mr. Keith is coming in. You don't see Mr. Keith a couple times. Not every time Mr. Keith comes in, he's gonna put a little bit of his uniform on. I'm slowly orientating this child to a safe place. By the end of that time, Mr. Keith is now fully in his uniform, and he's still that safe Mr. Keith. That's the intentionality that we have to erase the stigma that our kids are inheriting from the reality of the fear. Because the history of policing was never for the Black community, and we have to acknowledge that. But we can erase the stigma, but it takes a lot of intentionality. So everything that I did, I had to get it first. I had to believe it first. I had to have a different experience. And it only happened when I seen police officers that looked like me, that can build that trusting relationship that I knew was advocating. And then I needed to say, okay, how can I translate this to children with their development? Well, we're gonna orientate them to Mr. Keith. So Mr. Keith is gonna be a familiar, safe person. He's gonna come in plain clothes. By the time that we get done, Mr. Keith now is gonna be in full uniform. Now I can say you can trust Mr. Keith. That's all I can say. I can't say you can trust Mr. Tom or Derek or Diane. Mr. Keith is one, but we start with one. We start with one representation of it. The other thing is being a part of the community. I love when I see law officials and police officers in the community, just in play, engaging. Like the only time you're in our community is to arrest, oppress, distress, that's an issue, right? That's the issue. I need you to engage with our kids. I need you to know their names. What ice cream do you like? Though when I see those Facebooks of those police officers, they know the generations of that family. So when that kid saw that candy at the candy store, he's not gonna arrest him. He's gonna be like, Auntie Karen, don't play that. Right, and and that child knows what that means. That I have Auntie Karen holds me to this regard, and so I want Auntie Karen to be proud of me. That's the amount of community presence that we need. You got to build that trusting relationship, and not just be physically present, but actually be a part of the community for all normal things, day-to-day experiences. That is a start. That's a start. Candice, thoughts about the duality, or just how do we create it? If it's not there and the blueprint is not laid in front of us, then how do we start to create it as a different generation of caregivers raising a different generation of children?
Well, you made a really good point when you were saying like not painting this generalized picture of police, and that happens for all kids. Like they get this blanket picture of like, this is who the police are, and like you're saying, there's no connection to a specific name or a specific face. And I too can remember from my childhood the community-based police that were always like, those 3 police officers, they were always at the park, and that officer so and so,
Yeah.
he knew where I lived. He knew,
Yeah.
oh, here they come. And so I think we've lost some of that. And then now that a lot of the trust is broken, there has to be this rebuilding of trust. And so we need to see their face. And as parents, as community members, we need to know that we can demand that level of activity from police officers in our community, that we want them to be present. We don't just want them to drive around, tell them to get out and walk in the park and say hello and get to know the people in the community. There are some organizations who are working on that, but I think also, like you're saying, is we have to kind of seek out those resources that don't paint this one picture of like who the police are and how they're supposed to be, because then all of a sudden reality hits some people in the face, and it's like, well, I learned that police, well, they're supposed to serve and protect, but that wasn't my experience. Well, what was your experience with that one officer? Who do you have an experience with? And this, how can we teach our children, like you're saying, get them acclimated to the person and not necessarily the position? We don't really do that with like any other profession. Even when kids say, well, when I grow up I want to be a teacher, we say, well, oh, why? Like, who's your favorite teacher? Who does that remind you of? We teach them how to make the connection between what they want to be when they grow up to like an experience they had, a person. We don't do that with law enforcement. You got the toy trucks, you've got the movies, you've got all of those things paint this picture of law enforcement for our kids, but we were not giving them the individual experience of like actually getting to know. And on the other side, a lot of our law enforcement professionals are not taking the opportunity, to immerse themselves in their community and become a part of the community and build relationships, because that is huge. That is their job.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
if they need to be the ones also to be the bridge builders, not just the citizens, but also the law enforcement need to be the bridge builders, and create space and opportunity to get to know the people in their community. But I think then that helps us to have the conversation with our kids of, like you're saying, okay, well, Mr. Keefe, tell me about Mr. Keefe. Yep, we had this experience with Mr. Keefe, but, Johnny Boy, well, Johnny Boy is not Mr. Keefe. Johnny Boy learned some things differently, and unfortunately, he did treat that person wrong. And so then it helps us to have the conversation about why we do see negative experiences and we do see police officers, murdering and harassing and killing and all of those things. But then our children are able to know, like, okay, I can still trust Mr. Keefe. Like, I know that he is an officer that I can trust and that I can go to, even though these situations are happening. And I mean, I kind of feel like it's like in all of our other professions, again, our kids have negative experiences with teachers. They don't write off all of their teachers, but they know I got to figure out which of my teachers are the ones that I can trust, which are the ones that know me and that I can build a relationship with, who are the ministers or the youth leaders or, my doctor. If I don't have a good relationship with my doctor, I find a different doctor. If I have a negative experience, I don't say to myself, I'm never going to the doctor again because and I also don't say, well, it doesn't matter which doctor I have because all doctors are fantastic. No, we demand, like, tell me about yourself. What's your background? Like, why did you work at this hospital? Why did you want to be in this clinic? I mean, do you live near the teachers? Do you live near the school district? So the same thing, we need to learn how to train ourselves, how to have those same conversations with our police officers. Oh, do you live in Venice Heights? This is where I live. Do you live here? Oh, what do you enjoy about the community? What other things are you involved in? And pay attention to who shows up and who doesn't show up. Because like Rochelle said, then when you're paying attention to who shows up and who doesn't show up, then as a community, then you're able to say, wow, I think this person is really disconnected. I don't know if this is the community for them. I don't ever see them. They're never around. They're only around when something is perceived to be going wrong, and then boom, they show up. But other than that, I don't see them. So maybe this isn't the best community for them. Maybe they need to be reassigned somewhere else, like you said. And we need to know that is our right, and that we can ask for those things. That's the other thing, and is that we need to understand as parents, educators, people in our community, that we have a voice, that our local government, we can create change on a local level. We need to pay attention to who we're putting in city council or commission, alderman, whatever it's calling, in those positions, because those are the people that you're going to call and you're going to say, I want to file a complaint about the sheriff's office. I want to file a complaint about X, Y, and Z. So if we don't even know who those people are, then we have to totally back up. And we don't have to devote our entire life to it, but we got to be aware. We've got to do some homework and learn about who are the people that are representing me in my community. Do they know my concerns? One of the things here in Minnesota, and in my job that I've learned about over the years is our legislative process. And in talking to some of our legislators, some of these, for the majority, a lot of them hear from 2 to 3 people in a legislative season. And so when it comes to creating bills, passing bills, accountability of public servants, they're only hearing from less than a handful of people. And so if we, develop that space where more people in the community, in the midst of crisis and outside of crisis, can consistently engage people who are making decisions, then it changes. It interrupts that cycle that we only deal with the police when X, Y, and Z is happening, and they don't come around us unless there's something happening. Because they're seeing that we're getting more involved, that we're expecting more of them. I want to get to know you. I want to have a relationship with you. And then for the ones when we see that red flag, they don't want to come around, they don't want that relationship, then it's like, okay, mark them and keep working and say, okay, we need to keep our eye on you too. Maybe you need to be in a different community. Maybe you need some education, maybe you need some different training, and be the ones to offer it to them and show our kids that like they can do that too. That you need to know who your officers are. You need to know them by name. They should know you live in this community. For me in the suburbs, when you drive, y'all should know I live here. Don't, because you should be a part of the community.
I want to be respectful to everybody's time, so we'll start the wrap up. But I think what just both of you guys are saying is the key word is opportunities and taking control. And there's an opportunity at every given moment, whether you're on the front lines and you're protesting and you're providing the opportunity to have a safe space for children to process and express themselves naturally. There's an opportunity to educate. There's an opportunity to provide different experiences for children. There's an opportunity, and this is my favorite word I've been using, to create a new we, to literally create a new we. We cannot resolve what's happened in the past. We can only go forward and create a new we. So what does that look like? What does that new we look like? What does that look like for our children? What does that look like for us as adults? We cannot provide a level of safety for our kids if us as adults are still showing fear for police officers. So we have to be able to take that step and engage and process our own fears and our emotional wounds of what the uniform represents. And then the opportunity just to normalize these everyday conversations. It doesn't have to be a big show. It doesn't have to be a live talk, a TED talk, or whatever, but that we're having conversations like this on a regular in our community, that we're inviting people outside of our circle in, we're increasing our village, our sister circle comes in. We have these conversations with kids and adults at the same time, so that we're engaging them and we're supporting one another, an opportunity to recreate the village, to raise racially conscious children while building a strong sense of self at the same time and preparing them for the world. that is my takeaway. I feel like for everything that we talked about is opportunities and taking the advantage of those opportunities and not sitting by that we do have the opportunity to vote. How many people have voted in the primaries, the state elections? How many people have actually went and testified? Have you taken your kid with you to the Capitol to see what that experience is like? Right, walking them through that experience. When I talk to this senator, this is what the senator's job is. And mommy's going to talk to the senator and she's going to tell them our story. And that might be law, right? That early age, I have power and control and I can influence a law. It's that intentionality that we can give our brown and Black children that we have to start to think of how to do things differently. So what are kind of just a last wrap up of what everything that we talked about, from the role and engaging our children and talking about race and police brutality and words have meaning. We're talking about demonstrations too, that duality role that our brown body kids hold. And then just, if you could sum it up as parents, as educators, as individuals, a part of this second episode of podcast, what would be some last minute words that you want to give to our listening audience? And either Rochelle or Candice, one of y'all can go first.
Sure, I'll go first. You know, I was in a group, a book club not that long ago, and we were reading Stamped, the short version. And one of the well, anti-racism, racism in you, not the Stamp from the beginning. Okay. But one of the women in the group, you know, as we were reading and as we were discussing, one of the things she said was, you know, I realize that it's a tough pill to swallow, you know, it's difficult to talk about, but we can handle it. And I was like, you know, right, you're right. Like, we can handle it. And it may be uncomfortable. We may have to like reach out to our network. We may have to say, you know what, I wasn't really good at that, but I want to be good. I want to find my voice, or I want to learn how to support my kids during this process and help them find their voice. But through all of it, for us to know that we can handle it. A lot of that was built into us just by the sheer nature of our history in this world. And so, but I take pride in that because, you know, I don't have to be afraid to have these conversations and to like hear something that makes me, ooh, I need to check that about myself, or I need to, I do need to evaluate my village. I think we might need a stronger village. Like, I appreciate that. You know, I appreciate that conversation. But we have to approach how we support our children. I want people to know that you can handle it. If you're a parent by proxy, if you're an educator, if you're a part of the village, you can handle it. And it's okay if you don't have all the answers. It's okay if you need some help, you know, processing through your own emotions and to support yourself, but we can handle it so that we can, like you said, create that new we, and support this fabulous generation that is rising up, that is just like not going to take it anymore. And that I have a lane, you have a lane, we all have a lane in this fight and in this process of really exposing and reshaping, you know, the landscape of our country. And our little ones are, you know, me is like, oh, I'm all things 0 to 5, and they're watching all of this, like they're absorbing all of this, and we don't have to be afraid of that, because it really is going to shape who they are and how they navigate through this world. And so I'm like, wow, like they are experiencing a pandemic, like worldwide cry for racial justice like we haven't seen before. And so, oh my gosh, what is that going to do for them as little beings as they get old, if we allow them to experience it, if we teach them how to process those emotions, if we teach them how to find their voice and build that community. That's what we want. I mean, that's literally what we want, right? And so I have to tell myself, okay, Candice, you can handle it. You can handle it, girl. talk to your kids, you know? And if you don't know how to talk to your kids, call somebody and ask, you know, it's time to set our pride aside, and swallow that pill because we can handle it. And so I'm really grateful for this conversation with you because I definitely took some things away that's like, okay, that was a tough pill to swallow, but I can handle it because I want to see better for my children. I want to see better for my community. And so thank you for that. So I appreciate that, but we can handle it.
For being honest, and I love that we can handle it because if I as an individual can't, I got a village for that. Mm-hmm. That literally needs to be an app. I got a village for that. And we forget that. I got a village for that. So even if it goes beyond my capacity, I have a village for that. We can handle it. I love it. Rochelle?
So I love reading, but I also love television shows. Television shows that just bring reality on TV. And one of my favorite shows is The Chi. I enjoy that. It touches on so many different things that happen in our Black communities that are real. And one of the young ladies, and she reminded me a little bit of myself because my parents were one of the ones that were like, okay, well, we're going to teach you, we want you to go to these schools because we want you to know how they think, talk, and walk so you can be better, right? So I appreciated it then. And then when I got older, I was like, well, I don't know if I want to do the same thing for my daughter, but maybe in a different way. And on that show, they have the young man who is Black, and he is in this private school, right? And so, you know, they bus in the Black kids from the inner city that are great kids to go to this private school. And so he has a crush on this little Black girl, and her parents are successful. So she wasn't bussed in, she walked through the door. Yeah. And so they had a conversation, and they were in class, and one of the white teachers, which is what sometimes happens, systematically said some things, and it kind of pissed the kids off. And so one of the young men was like, I don't care about her anyway. Like, who cares what she has to say? I'm not caring about this white woman, right? Mm-hmm. And the young lady says, she goes into this whole spiel, and she says, we can't just be excellent. We have to be phenomenal, right? Mm. So I actually used that in one of my thesis papers at the heading. We can't just be excellent. We've surpassed the benchmark of excellency. Black excellence. I'm excellent. How about that? We have to be phenomenal. Phenomenal means being intentional. It means raising our kids to know that they are better than anybody that they've ever seen. Speaking those affirmations into them daily. I am gorgeous. I am beautiful. I am smart. I am talented. Those things, because when you walk throughout your door into a classroom or into a street, you have positively affirmed who you are inside. So there's no one else can tell you something different because you know who you are. My daughter at 2 started saying she had Black girl magic inside of her classroom full of white kids. And her teacher asked me, well, what exactly does that mean? Jewel has such great self-esteem. And I said, well, what did she say? And it said, she says all the time that she has Black girl magic, and she has this invisible mirror that she puts up like that. And I said, well, that has to do with my sorority, but it also has to do with her being pretty. So she says, well, I wish I had the self-esteem of Jewel. I said, well, yeah, probably so. I said, Jewel speaks positive affirmations because I speak it into her. At nighttime, I whisper in her ear when she sleeps, and I tell her all the things that she is, so that when she wakes up, she feels empowered. We have to be phenomenal. I am raising phenomenal kids. I am teaching phenomenal students. So that is the mindset that I want to leave with all parents or anyone who's looking. We are beyond excellency. We are at the point of phenomenal. And in order to be phenomenal, we have to be intentional in whatever we do and say, visually, speaking, environments, whatever. And if you don't have much, figure out what that much looks like and figure out how you can get to the point of where you're at and excelling and being phenomenal at the place you're at. So you may not have to bus your kids across town to go to the school that has all the great textbooks. Figure out what the teachers are in the school that you're in and make sure you're in those classrooms with those teachers that are supportive. So in order to educate this new generation, in order to be supportive, we have to want to be supportive, and we have to figure out what we have and the tools that we have to grow them. from
Yeah.
right now. So
Yeah.
I guess that I would just end with that. We have to be more, we can't just be excellent, we have to be phenomenal. So let's try to be phenomenal.
I love that. And that is a segue literally to our next episode. Next week, it is on building the self-identity in brown and Black children and the importance of that. And I would end I am more than my circumstance, more than what you define me. And one of my favorite books, and I'm sending this and shouting out to all young women of color, be unapologetically you. So next week on Life Talks with your host, Kamila Howard, partnered by Children of Incarcerated Caregivers, we'll be talking about the importance of building self-esteem in our brown and Black body children. And some of the things that Rochelle and Candice has said with us today, we'll be able to elaborate that on more. Again, see us every Wednesday for Life Talks with your host, Kamila Howard. Thank you so much. Good night.